This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 158. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And it's a fine morning, and I'm ready to be back with y'all. Hope you're having a good one out there and ready to rock and roll another Telemark week. So, to jump right into it, we are going to be having some new hours at the shop starting today. And wanted to announce those on here for all the podcast listeners that are local to the Utah area and those afar that may be wanting to get a hold of us. We've been trying to come up with kind of a different flow than we've done in the past to better serve you out there. So the new shop hours will be as follows. We will be open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, noon until 7 p.m., and then Saturday, 10 until 4 p.m. So our hope is, last season, we basically weren't open Sunday and Monday, and we started recognizing that there was definitely some difficulty for those people that wanted to rent or get service picked up or dropped off after the weekend, and definitely realized that Mondays were probably a good option for us to be open. So we're going to give that a shot. Everything else is pretty much straightforward. We've been open Wednesday through Saturday so far this season. That's worked pretty well. So quick reminder on that is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, noon until 7, Saturday, 10 until 4. We will be closed Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So hopefully that'll work out. And we're looking forward to seeing more faces earlier in the week. So thanks for checking us out then. Okay, so about the boot debacle. I think we've been talking about this forever to try to get all of our Freeheel lifers out there in the know about what's going on with Scarpa boots this year, that we weren't going to get them. I'm finally starting to see other people bringing it up because now these shops that deal with a lot less than we do are starting to realize it and feel the pain too. So I feel for all of us out there. I will say there's motion in what's going on. Many of you we have reached out to and specifically gotten your information, name, and we have put it on a list that we are going to be reaching out to probably within the next week to start taking payment. So we've been kind of holding off because we're going to be the only ones getting an air shipment direct to Freeheel Life in North America. Everybody else is going to be shipped to Scarpa North America, and then they'll be distributed through the normal channels to the retailers. So seeing as it is December 5th, you can do the math. If it's other retailers, they're probably going to be getting it dialed in probably by late December. So if you want to get on our list and make sure that you're the first ones getting boots, please reach out to customer service at freeheellife.com and specifically mention Scarpa boots. Give us your size, model, phone number, email, and your full name. So that'll help us out, and we'll add you to the existing list of people. I will say there is a large number of folks on there, and so what we're trying to do is get that all corralled so that we can kind of cross-reference that with our original order that we had and make sure that we have all the boots coming. And if not, that we can adjust and get those sent. So that is the latest info on Scarpa boots, and hopefully that is helpful. So everything else we're pretty stocked up on, and you can check that out at freeheellife.com or come into the shop. So today's episode, what I wanted to dive into is this time of year, I always find myself obviously telemark skiing, but with the holidays coming around, I'm inside a lot. I'm with family. I'm hopefully chilling out before or after skiing. It's a nice time to drink coffee or hot cocoa or whatever you're into and just chill out, right? And that's when I find myself having a little more time to read. And I always enjoy reading up on telemark skiing when I can. But it kind of got me thinking that, I've touched on a couple of books here and there over the years on the podcast. And, one of the things that always comes to my mind is the fact that books regarding telemark skiing, whether it's technique oriented, history, whatever, that's probably the majority of them, honestly. There really hasn't been that many in recent times. And so I think a lot of these books kind of get recycled over time when people are looking for good reads about telemark. Obviously much of our information we get now is, visual YouTube videos. The how-to book has sort of become more video or web oriented, which totally makes sense. As you may have guessed, I kind of like the books sometimes, and especially because they're fun to dig into. And for those that like to read, it's nice to sit down with a book. And some of these older books are especially interesting to me because they help sort of define some of the history and whatnot. So today I thought I would go through some of my favorite picks of or favorite books or picks of books, however you want to word that, and share them with you, and maybe a couple excerpts from those books, what they're about, maybe where you might be able to find them. Most of them, I'm sure, Google search, used bookstores, Amazon, that sort of thing. But just kind of discuss them and share some of my reads as we head into the holiday season. You may want to pick one of these up too and do some reading of your own. So first book. This is a great starting point, and one that for the history buffs out there, I think is a great book to have in the library. And this is a book titled Sondre Norheim, The Father of Modern Skiing, by Anne-Gry, Blikom, and Eivind Molde. And I picked this copy up when I was in Morgedal during one of my visits, and I've really enjoyed this book. I've read it a couple times, and for me, it's one of these books that it gives you a really good insight into sort of Sondre Norheim, kind of the man behind the turn, so to speak, and really fascinating read about him living in Morgedal in Norway, kind of the start of telemark skiing, some of the aspects of ski culture that changed because of that, and then sort of equipment changes, really the transition of ski from transportation to sport. And it's really cool. And Norheim himself, this also talks a lot about sort of what happened in Norway during the mid 1800s, and then a little bit about him coming over to the United States, which is where he died and was buried in an unmarked grave in North Dakota, which is always a fascinating part of the story and one that I really liked. So I'm going to read the foreword from this book just to kind of give you a little insight into the basics of the book. But like I said, it covers a lot of ski history, a lot of telemark history, and obviously a lot about Sondre Norheim's life. So the foreword says, "The Norwegian ski legend Sondre Norheim is a familiar name in all parts of the ski-interested world. A lot of material about Sondre was published over the years. He is discussed in books, newspapers, magazines, TV specials, and websites, and he is presented at ski museums. Our goal with this book is to present the most important information about Sondre and related material in one place concisely. We want this to be the place where you can learn about his life, his family, his achievements, the Olympic torch ceremonies at his birthplace. We want to show the places where he lived and is buried, as well as informing readers the way this famous skier from Telemark has been honored even after his death. This book is based on the content of a website which we built in 2002, Sondre Norheim, the skiing pioneer of Telemark. The book has more text than the website. You will, for example, find more about Sondre's life in Norway and the United States here than on the web. And it goes on and on about talking. They did fantastic research on this. They talked to some of his relatives, and there's a great connection with the people of North Dakota in Minot, where they have a Norwegian festival. And for all you Midwesterners, I'm sure you're very familiar that there's a lot of Scandinavian roots across Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas. And it's a very cool story and very awesome to know that Sondre Norheim and a little piece of Telemark kind of plays into that. So that one is Sondre Norheim, the father of modern skiing. And you should be able to find this online. It's by Anne-Gry, Blikom, and Eivind Molde. All right, so the second book is one that many, many, many people are familiar with, and many, many people have learned how to telemark ski from this book. Not myself. I learned from a really old, I think I did have a copy of this at some point early on, but I learned from a book that I'm not going to talk about today, which is called Cross Country Downhill from Steve Barnett. But this book is one that many of you have heard of. It's called Alan and Mike's Really Cool Telemark Tips. 123 amazing tips to improve your tele skiing by Alan O'Bannon and Mike Clelland. So if you haven't seen this book, it's cool. It's illustrated. It's broken down into all these tips. I mean, it's something you could throw in your bag, and it's just got a lot of different stuff, from stance stuff to counter rotation to using shorter poles, to finding your mantra. Even has how to use a lurk. But it's super fun, and I think this is one that even today probably stays relevant, because the technique, although arguably the technique can change from era to era, as I've discussed so many times on the podcast, the feeling of an era of telemark might be different, but the technique in and of itself is the same. How you drop your knee, weighting, weighting your feet, how that works, the dynamics of the turn, counter rotating your body, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to read why I think this is relevant too. And I wanted to read just kind of these are just a couple words from the authors, and that I thought were kind of relevant, but I think also make it relevant for a reading in 2022. So a word from Mike, and I'm just kind of jumping into this. I'm not starting at the beginning, but a word from Mike. He says, "What I am is a cartoonist and a ski bum. My formative years were spent reading Mad Magazine, and now that's how I'm forever doomed to draw. My illustration style looks goofy, and the goofier the better. In this book, I've worked hard to transpose the very subtle mechanics of telemark skiing into an overtly visual and berserk cartoonorama. My goal was to give you something concrete to latch onto in the midst of all these sometimes esoteric skiing skills. You'll probably notice my editorializing in these pages. I like to get low in my turn. I prefer the backcountry to chairlifts, and I love skiing powder. And I still love my old leather boots. Plus, they're fun to draw. There is an inherent beauty in those smelly old leathers that just can't be matched by my new plastic monstrosities. A majority of the cartoons in this book reflect this truism. And he kind of goes on talking about starting to telemark in 1987. And also, again, he kind of hits on the idea that the cartoons are meant to convey tips and are not to be taken super maybe seriously. And you know, he's obviously reminiscing about a certain time period and has that Mad Magazine style of cartoon illustration. So, but I think it's fun. And like I said, regardless of what the cartoons and the illustrations look like, the technique is still the same. So, Mike here loves gaiters and leather boots, and that's what you're going to get when you see this book. And this book's been around for a really long time too. Obviously he's got plastic boots, but I love that. And I think that's what's cool about this book is it's pretty timeless in terms of learning how to do stuff. Alan, the other author, excuse me. I'll read a couple of his words, and he kind of talks a little bit more about the instruction aspect about this. This book is our attempt to help you improve your skiing. I must admit that I was skeptical about the idea of writing a ski tips book. Not because I didn't think it would be fun or useful, or because I didn't think we would achieve fame or fortune, but rather because skiing is such a hard thing to teach. One person's key to success doesn't work for someone else, often because that someone else is too busy struggling with some uncooperative part of their anatomy to comprehend the valuable advice just given to them. It's all they can do to respond, uh-huh. So, I wanted to bring this book up. This is a great read and it's fun. Honestly, killer stocking stuffer. And I think it's just a fun one. It's a fun one, again, to have in the library. And I think as a telemark skier, it's something you could hand to somebody and give them something fun to look at. And I love kind of flipping through these these illustrations are great, just from a historical standpoint. There's just so many interesting takes on stuff. So, and highlight number 87, the mystical truths revealed within the telemark turn. So you can check that one out too. All right, hopping into the next one. I've talked a little bit about this book once, I think, and I can't remember. I think I was in a mailbag episode or something, and there was a funny picture, and I was kind of using this as a reference point. But this has been recommended to me by people that were around the telemark scene kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, and that's kind of how it got on my radar. So this is definitely more of a historical piece, but I will say, as I've seen more people picking up vintage setups for their quiver, like I do, I love skiing my vintage stuff. It's fun, not all the time, but it's fun to have. This would be a fun book for people to read, honestly, especially if you want to kind of learn some techniques. That there's a certain era of technique with vintage equipment where you kind of have, again, this book was, I think, first published in 1982. Sorry, I haven't even given you the title yet. It's Mountain Skiing by Vic Bein. And about the technique from that era, I mean, if you've skied on a double camber Nordic style telemark ski kind of from that era, there's certain techniques that are just lost in modern gear. So if you're someone who just, wants to mess around and get a vintage setup, meaning, low cut leather boots, something over 200 centimeters, 3 pins, etc. This is where I like these types of books, because I come across things that I think have just gotten lost over time and may or may not be used anymore for teaching purposes or whatever. Not to say, I don't know, not to say you couldn't use it. So I was going to share one with you. This was sort of and this book definitely covers a lot of mountaineering, everything from self-arrest to skinning to even has alpine touring stuff in it actually at the back. But it's really, it even has a race section in the Telemark section, which I always think is super interesting. But I digress. What I wanted to talk to you about was what I came across in this one technique section called the crossover telemark. So I'll try to remember to post a picture of this, but let me read it to you because it is fascinating, and especially on this equipment. Have you ever accidentally crossed your skis when telemarking and felt your rear skis tip slide behind the heel of your lead boot? The remedy? Don't fight it. Just start turning in this crossed over position. The first step in learning the crossover telemark is practicing simple crossovers. Ski down a very gentle, almost flat slope, lift one ski, say the right one, and cross it over the left. Then lift the left ski and cross it over the right. Repeat this exercise many times until you feel comfortable doing crossovers. The next step is to combine a crossover with a turn. After crossing the right ski over the left, assume a telemark turn position. The right ski will be leading with more than half of your weight on it and with some angle between the skis. The larger the angle, the sharper the turn. Keep turning to the right until you slow down to a comfortable speed, then do another crossover to regain your normal leg position. I look at this and I think I could do that on modern equipment, and I look at what they're doing it on and I am highly, highly impressed. So if you want to either dive into some old exercises and things that you can do on your telemark skis, some good things, exercises. I've talked about this things. Sometimes you just want to go out and better yourself and spend some time on the hill doing drills. There's a lot of interesting drills in here that I've never seen before. So the crossover telemark being one of them. So definitely check that out. Mountain Skiing by Vic Bein. And if you do a crossover telemark, get it on video. Send it to me. Okay. Kind of going to another classic instructional book. This is one, I have not read this all the way through, to be quite honest. But it's definitely one I want to spend some time reading. So again, I want to share it with you. Definitely one to grab too. And many of these, like I said, I haven't really dug in to see what of these are in print and what are not. Most likely, most of them are not in print. So you'll probably need to find some sort of, like I said, used bookstore or something along those lines. So this next book is called Freeheel Skiing, The Secrets of Telemark and Parallel Techniques in All Conditions by Paul Parker. So Paul Parker, someone who was around telemark equipment design for many, many years. His name's come up countless times in the podcast. He has not been on the podcast. Hopefully one day I'll be able to get him on. But talking to guys like Art Burrows, if you listen to that podcast, Kim Miller, CEO at Scarpa now, Paul Parker, it's just one of those names that's sort of synonymous with telemark and instruction, and he was on the PSIA Nordic demo team, I think, during this era. And this is just like one of those classic instructional books, you know. And when you open up the acknowledgments and credits, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, photography, Michael Kennedy, which I think is the Michael Kennedy that started Climbing Magazine. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's who it is. Ace Cavale. He's part of kind of that crew with John Faulkner, who's also in some of these photos. He's been on the podcast. John Monnier, I've heard his name a bunch from the early Telemark people. Yvon Chouinard, etc. So cool book just from a history perspective and kind of seeing what was going on in this era. And I wanted to read one of these introductions, kind of forwards from one of those people. And it goes like this, just to kind of give you an idea of what kind of skier Paul was and what kind of chops he had on the hill. I can't always listen to Parker. Sometimes I have to just watch. A few years ago, several of us spent a week in the Sierra skiing the peaks north of Mount Whitney. It was late spring and there had been a day of wet snow and rain, followed by a couple of cold nights. So when going out over Shepherd Pass, it was no surprise to find the north side a sheet of ice. No way was I going to even attempt traverses or kick turns on that 35 degrees of smooth ice. I climbed down the rocks, paralleling the gully as far as I could, and was searching through my pack for something sharp and hard to scratch steps when I looked up to see Parker with his 40-pound pack jump turning down in perfect control. We all watched, fairly aghast, when Paul stopped, looked down at his feet, and calmly announced that the bail on one of his experimental bindings had broken on one side. He pushed off again, this time being careful to keep the one ski on ice so he didn't jump out of the binding. By the time he was safely down, I was so shattered that I threw off my heavy pack and watched it whirl down in great leaps for hundreds of feet to the snowfield below. Then I pulled out a couple of tent pegs and started scratching nicks in the ice, lowering myself down on my belly. Hey, Paul, wait for me. Yvon Chouinard. So these guys were legendary, honestly. The gear that they're turning on, again, lightweight Nordic equipment, most likely 3-pins or early cable bindings, and it's hard. So, and then just, it goes right into, Paul Parker says, downhill skiing on skinny skis can be like driving a 55 Ford with bald tires. Skiddy, unsure, and imprecise. Alpine skiing is on the other end of the spectrum. Fast, crisp, and exact. More like driving a Porsche. My goal in both skiing and teaching the sport has been to combine these two extremes in a marriage of freeheel mobility with alpine precision. It works. So I kind of like that too, because, and I wanted to read that part because I think that's such a good insight into this type of a book. When Telemark came back in the picture in the late 1970s, and into when this book was written in the late 80s, it was all about mobility, light mobility, and using these skinny, light skis with a Nordic downhill technique. I think what's interesting is sort of in his description of the book, it sort of talks about Alpine being sort of this precision, sort of Porsche style driving, and that era of Telemark equipment not being that way. I think in our era of Telemark in 2022, honestly, it's probably a blend of the two. I think we're obviously not dealing with lightweight equipment in that way. And we've talked about that over and over with equipment that's out there. But I think a lot of the equipment and a lot of the area inbounds where people are telemarking now are probably incorporating a blend of those techniques, which is really cool. So hopefully we'll get Paul Parker on the podcast at some point. It'd be fun to pick his brain on that particular subject amongst many, many others and everything that he was involved in. And but until then, check out Freeheel Skiing by Paul Parker. It's got that nice forward from Yvon Chouinard. Okay, this next one is a fun one, and I'm pretty sure that one of the guys in this book who was on the podcast, Keith Calhoun, sort of tipped me off about this one. I had not heard of it. It is called Total Telemarking, written and edited by Brad English. And we are looking at let's see, I was going to look for the published date here, 1984, kind of around that time, about the time Vic Bein put out Mountain Skiing. And this one is really, I like this book a lot. It's got some cool color photos in it. It definitely kind of touches on a lot of, I believe he must have been part of kind of that early Crested Butte crew. If you haven't listened to the episode with Keith Calhoun, it's a great episode about sort of what I would call almost the second phase of the Telemark revival in Crested Butte. There's kind of the earlier group with like Rick Borkovac and some of those folks. And then this was sort of the second group, and it involved this group called the Ski to Die Club. And I believe Brad English was a part of this because that is who he dedicated this book to. So I'm just going to kick this off. The dedication, which I love, is to the Ski to Die Club, whose members teach by doing, and to my parents who somehow understand my Sisyphean fanaticism for going up and down mountains. This book is gratefully dedicated. Fortune favors the brave. Live to ski, ski to die, and live to ski another day. And this is an awesome book that it's got tips in it. It talks about telemark racing. It's got freestyle jumping. And actually, I just found a photo from Rick Borkovac of Penelope Street. A lot of these names, there's just so many cool pictures and techniques and exercises and drills and all sorts of stuff. And then, obviously, because what I mentioned too is there's this mountaineering aspect in these early Telemark crews or groups or individuals. They're obviously exploring a lot on this lightweight touring equipment too. So there's some of that as well too. And I wanted to jump from the dedication to the back of the book. There's a kind of a in chapter called Expeditions to the Ultimate Extreme Cross Country. And this is a part right at the beginning. It says, the expression ski to die has become a standard credo for telemarkers around the world. One that symbolizes the spirit of the individual who accomplishes what has never been done before. It is the defiant response to those who cry, it can't be done on skinny skis, because no one else has ever tried. Yet little skill is required to descend a slope like, quote, the man who fell down Everest, and any fool can commit suicide. Ski to die, then, is just an expression meant to be taken only so far in practice. The intelligent skier, Nordic or Alpine, will not intentionally place himself in a situation where death is likely, yet must always realize death as a possibility that demands consideration. Thus, the object of extreme skiing, or any skiing, becomes a matter of survival with style. Love that. And I love that I wanted to read that just because of how it kind of references what telemarketers were thinking, at that time. And, I think in that era, it was much of, you can't do this because it's on skinny skis. I mean, this has persisted as long as I've been telemarking the last 30 years is, really, I think there's this, not only do people get in because they're interested in this technique and it looks cool and it's fun. I think once you're in it, then it's about how can I do everything on this equipment? And I think that's just sort of built into the mentality of Telemark. And I think that illustrates it quite well, that whatever era of Telemark, it's always been this push to sort of figure it out on the Freeheel equipment. So I absolutely love that. And that's a super fun book. And like I said, it's not as well known, at least, I mean, obviously this was a long time ago, 40 years ago, but you can still find it out there, and it's a really, really cool piece of history. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up this little book journey, thanks for coming to the book club, everybody. This was a book I heard referenced early on as, I want to say I had read something about some early Crested Butte stuff. This is years and years ago, and I might even be making it up. Who knows? But I seem to remember hearing that people in the 70s here in America were kind of seeing pictures of this book that I'm about to mention, and they saw the Telemark turn, and then they realized that they had this lightweight Nordic gear, and they started trying to figure it out. And so it kind of always got me thinking, I need to get this book and read it. This is a book called Come Ski With Me by Stein Eriksen. And if you don't know who Stein Eriksen is, he was a very famous Norwegian skier, Olympian. Later in his career, kind of helped, was sort of the famous person at Deer Valley here in Utah. Stein Eriksen Lodge is there. But very, very accomplished skier in his own right. But this book that Stein Eriksen wrote is such an interesting book because it's got some really cool history and sort of talks about his history on a personal level too. And there's actually a picture, the picture that I had kind of heard of Marius Eriksen, Stein's father, performing an elegant Telemark turn. The picture was in 1907. And it's sort of just this silhouette style black and white photo of Marius Eriksen, Stein's father, making this sweet telly turn. And here's one little part about in the book, kind of up front, talking about when modern skiing begins in the 1850s. Sondre Norheim, a courageous young skier, decided that in order to take full advantage of his skis, he must be tied to them firmly as though they were ice skates. Norheim took thin birch roots, soaked them in hot water so that they would be flexible, and twisted them together so that they would fit around his heel and hold it in place. In 1850, Norheim jumped 60 feet, and a contemporary writer noted, quote, "He stood on his skis down the steepest valley inclines and on mountainsides with the maximum of stability. He made graceful turns around bushes and trees and was really an artist on his skis," close quote. Sondre Norheim was the father of ski jumping and of slalom. He was the first to execute a Telemark turn and the first to do a Christiana. This was more than 100 years ago. And if you didn't catch that, a Christiana turn is, in their footnote, they call it a parallel Telemark, but that Christiana turn's an alpine turn. So I love this little history nugget in there. I love that he talks about being an artist on his skis. And I love that his father has this sweet photo making a Telemark turn in the early 1900s. And I think that's, like I said, these are kind of a collection of books that I've collected along the way for various reasons, some for historical insights and studying research. Some are fun to see, like I said, some old drills to bring back. Things get forgotten, I mean, that's sort of how history goes a lot of times. If we don't keep it going and we don't modify it, we don't use it, maybe as the equipment changed, sometimes the technique might modify a little bit, or in search of progress, people forget about things that are actually pretty good. And I think that's a common theme too. So I love these books, and I think it's a fun way because, most of these are not digitized. These are not books you're going to look up on Audible, for instance. If they're on there, I'd be super surprised. But it requires a little sit down, relax, have a drink, sit by the window, sit by a fire, and just, kind of take some time and dig into some of this stuff. And I think what's apparent is that telemarketers have always had a similar mentality, and there's kind of a common thread. And I think all of these books are great illustrations of that. And then there's obviously some great books talking about technique, like the Paul Parker book, and like Alan and Mike's Telemark Tips book, just some kind of fun ones. So that's my hope, is that you also will find this interesting, and maybe you'll pick up one of these books too. And I would love to hear what you think about it. If you do get one of these books, or if you have another book suggestion, I would love to hear that as well. So you can hit me up direct at podcast@freeheellife.com. You can hit up all of the team at customer service at freeheellife.com. Don't forget, we've got those new hours starting today, noon to 7, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Saturday, 10 to 4. You can always find us at customer service at freeheellife.com. Like I said, that's a great way. Email kind of gets it on the radar. If you call, especially because we're such a small crew, if you call, you can leave a voicemail, but email is a great way to just kind of get in there and get things rolling quick. So thank you as always for your patience, supporting our small business. We love and care about Telemark so much, and really believe that we, along with all of you out there, are protectors of the turn and the history of it and everything that's important that goes along with telemark skiing around the globe. So I've had a really fun time sharing this stuff with you today. You can find me on my Instagram at Josh Nomadson. That's a good place to check out stuff. And at Freeheel Life for the brand and the retail shop and all that good stuff. So I'll let you get going. Hope you have a great week. And until next week, brothers and sisters of the turn, spread telemark always. See you later.